Major funding for Telehell is provided by Dave's Archives. At Dave's Archives, he personally transfers, archives, and preserves classic commercials from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s and shares them with you. Don't forget about his Friday night live stream on, well, guess when? Go to davesarchives.com. By RetroCirque on YouTube. RetroCirque has a whole new look and a new attitude as they bring retro commercials like never before. Always look for RetroCirque with a Q at the end. Bring your team with their team with RetroCirque, a Broadcast Plaza server partner. By Kier's Nostalgia Corner, a collection of commercial compilations, retro nostalgic things, and other random things that come to mind. Look for her on YouTube at KIERS Nostalgia Corner. And don't forget to check out her live streams early in the week. Could be Sundays, could be Mondays. Either way, they're fun days. And by the very generous benefactors who grace us on our Patreon at patreon.com/telehellpodcast, including Ed Beatty Jr., Rhonda Farrell, Rick Kalacki Jr., Chris Michaud, Meredith Morrissey, Rabbite, Spare Parts, and Neil Weinstein. Thank you.
Previously on Telehell.
Ugh. Oh, what smells like mustard and year-old cheese? Down I go.
Sorry I had to gas you there, fucknuts, but you were starting to ask too many questions. Move him downstairs, goons.
Are you sure you wanna go through with this, Chief?
He's been doing things the same way about 106 ways by now. All of them sloppy, all of them boring, all of them with minimal effort, and even some of them with something positive to talk about. Something's gotta change, and something's gotta give, and if it means putting him through the machine, I gotta do what I gotta do.
Oh, I hope you know what you and Honey are getting yourselves into.
I could give two fucks about him. As long as the next subject he was supposed to cover wasn't too heavy a topic, it should be okay for a test run. What was he supposed to review next anyway?
The Civil War defined America, both the good and the bad. Who would have thought there was a comedy in all that?
A sitcom set during the Civil War? Go down to the Gluttony Circle, see if they have any extra bottles of moonshine around. This is gonna be an all-nighter. Okay, so 1990s Civil War sitcom. Let's see what the subgenre recommendations are. A little on the nose, but you know what, who cares? It's just a beta test anyway. Hope you like PBS, fuck sauce.
Every man is said to have his peculiar ambition. Whether it be true or not, I can say for one that I have no other so great as that of being truly esteemed of my fellow men. Abraham Lincoln, 1832.
It was a time in the history of the United States where the nation would face one of its greatest challenges. A time when brother fought against brother for what they felt would be in the best interests for the future of the country. Whereas one side fought for honor, the other side wound up fighting for a naked sense of self-preservation, thinly disguised as the best of intentions for everyone else. And yet, even when this conflict came to an end, repercussions of the conflict would continue to echo and ripple throughout society. And in some cases, those same echoes and ripples would attempt to be harnessed in an effort to steer the narrative in a completely different direction than anyone ever intended. one man sought out to do exactly that.
I found television to be exciting. There was an energy to it. I always liked TV a lot more than I liked journalism. Dean Valentine, CEO, United Paramount Network.
Telehell, episode 107. The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer. And just so this sounds somewhat dignified, the P will be silent for most of this program. Some 130 years after the Civil War ended, a different kind of war was taking place well to the west of any battlefield. One whose casualties were not spilled in blood, but rather in red ink, hemorrhaging from the money being spent to keep two warring yet budding television networks both on the air and relevant at the same time. One encampment in the Los Angeles stronghold of Burbank saw a faction led by a frog in a top hat and a shield with the letters W and B emblazoned upon itself. While another encampment deeper in the stronghold of Hollywood and adorned with a marble arch on the boulevard of Melrose Avenue was looking to seek its victory from the top of a mountain with a half circle of stars surrounding it. They were the armies of Warner Brothers and Paramount Television, whose battalions, known as the WB and the United Paramount Network, or UPN, were engaged in a battle over the hearts and minds of demographics that have yet to be impacted by television's reach. In 1997, it seemed as though the battle lines were already drawn for both networks. Warner's television audience seemed to stem from the various sitcoms it ran, a smattering of family programs, and a soon-to-be valuable resource for the network, teen-themed drama shows. All the while, Paramount's audience stemmed from the name-brand recognition of their existing science fiction television franchise, as well as the emerging audiences with the urban demographic, thanks to sitcoms that appealed the most to them. Both networks seem to have had a foothold on what their overall identity would be after those first few years. And for the most part, the war waged on with seemingly little notice or care, either from the network's main competitors or from the viewing public. And from both points of view, that was perfectly fine while both of them were still in their infancies, trying to figure out what worked in their battle plans and what didn't. The only competition they seemed to worry about was each other's, and that conquering the ratings overall would only be icing on the cake. Then came the spring of 1997, when it was announced that the United Paramount Network's four-star general and CEO in charge of the network, Luce Selhany, would be retiring from both the United Paramount Network's brigade and the Viacom Army overall. A new general had to take her place immediately. Would the network's new general continue to steer the fledgling network in its current direction, or would this leader have a different objective in mind? The Viacom Army had no time to waste in searching for and selecting their next recruit. Who they recruited certainly had the experience to command an army. But did he have enough experience within him with which to actually lead?
We looked at the numbers and said, gee, what's it going to look like in a certain number of years if you continue to go this way? It looked really, really bad. So it was my decision, rightly or wrongly, to make as radical a break as possible from that strategy and go another way. Dean Valentine.
Dean Valentine was a master sergeant who led the brigade among many encampments of show business, including a hitch in NBC's Army working alongside Sergeant Major Brandon Tartikoff during the network's renaissance in the 1980s, followed by a hitch in the battalion of the television division of the Walt Disney Studios, where alongside Brigadier General Michael Eisner would help spearhead the launches of numerous sitcom classics under the Touchstone television banner, up to and including the shows that would air in the mid-1990s as part of the ABC network's fabled TGIF lineup. It was thanks to those successes that the Viacom Army took notice and thought, UPN is a network seeking a young audience, and Valentine is a man who developed shows for a young audience. We must commission him immediately. And so, in the summer of 1997, Valentine was ordained the UPN Battalion's newest general and chief executive officer, one whose battle plan to vanquish the competition was seen by some as equal parts unorthodox, counterproductive, yet counterintuitive to what the other networks, including what their main competitor in the WB Battalion, were already doing. The battle plan that Valentine wanted to unleash involved expanding the network's potential audience reach well beyond its established hold on both urban and male demographics. That he believed there should be more broad in broadcasting.
Television is a mirror. People are looking for a mirror of their own lives in television, and that mirror was completely broken in the American broadcast landscape when I took over UPN. What America looked like if you were watching television was a bunch of loathsome upper-middle-class New Yorkers and a bunch of equally repellent teens with infinite amounts of money, doing incredibly well in the economy. They all had great jobs. They all had no problems except zits or their boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever. As a kid who grew up in Queens, I found it personally repellent. And I found it as a business opportunity. Dean Valentine.
In order for General Valentine's battle plan to stay on point, initial entries for the 1997-98 television season involved a series of what are known as reboots and throwbacks. His biggest priority of the 1998 mid-season was an attempt to revive a staple of the 1970s and 80s. While there was some interest in a revival of The Love Boat, starring another staple of the 70s and 80s, Robert Urich, as the ship's captain, the show stuck out like a sore thumb amongst the action and urban shows that the UPN Brigade had already established and would be canceled the following year. Valentine's next plan to go broad with the audience actually would not take place until the following TV mid-season of 1999, when he thought the same UPN audience would be interested in an animated version of the comic strip Dilbert. While the show did gain a cult following, it too would be canceled in about a year and a half. Somewhere in between that time period, Valentine would also attempt to bring Ed Sullivan back from the dead via artificial intelligence technology. This too would fail for reasons that predate this story. But it was one particular project that General Valentine was interested in that he decided to make the linchpin of the UPN Battalion's campaign in the fall of 1998. The inspiration for this new show came from Valentine's appreciation of a classic sitcom from the UK called Blackadder. A series of period-pieced stories that chronicled the life and times of various descendants in the aptly named Blackadder bloodline, all of whom were portrayed by Lieutenant and series co-creator Rowan Mr. Bean Atkinson. In the series run, 4 different time periods would be represented: medieval times, the Elizabethan era, the Revolutionary War, and World War I. The show wound up achieving acclaim thanks to the likes of Atkinson in the title role, as well as his platoon of soldiers and future stars, including Tony Robinson, Tim McInerney, Miranda Richardson, Stephen Fry, and Hugh Laurie. Valentine was enamored with the dark humor of the series and thought to himself, What if UPN did their own version of Blackadder by chronicling key points in American history with similarly dark-humored points of view? This was where the general recruited a pair of experienced hired hands to spearhead both the production and the writing of this American adaptation. Corporals Barry Finaro and Mort Nathan, both of whom had already logged significant battle time alongside Valentine while deployed at the Walt Disney Company and Touchstone Television, as head writers and showrunners for The Golden Girls. By 1998, both gentlemen would already be ensconced within the ranks at Paramount under their own production company, Finaro Nathan Productions, when the United Paramount Battalion recruited the duo to formulate the battle plan. Their idea was very much similar to that of the formula left behind by the Blackadder campaign: to lampoon and parody an era of historical significance, while at the same time use the power of that parody to reflect upon what was taking place in the throes of current events. A plan that was easier said than done. Whereas Blackadder feasted upon the trappings of significant moments in British history, Finaro and Nathan needed to pick an era of history that had not been portrayed too frequently on television, yet not frequently enough that there would still be fertile ground that was ripe for parody. They didn't want the era to be too recent in history, yet they didn't simply want to repeat what Blackadder did in their own eras. What era of American history would the Viacom Army, the UPN Brigade, General Valentine, and Corporals Finaro and Nathan agree to be that fertile ground?
The North, a beacon for industry and progress. The South, steeped in a proud tradition of honor. George Hazard.
Television programs and motion pictures that took place during the era of the Civil War were not unprecedented. But amongst the dozens of productions that were made over the decades, whether serialized, in limited run, or a single 2-hour story, the common thread between them all was the undisputable fact that not a single one of the documented productions on record involved comedy. Every one of those stories were dramas. Finaro and Nathan were comedy writers. Comedy was all they knew.
What we learned at Fox was that we weren't thought of as a network by the viewer. Our programming was seen as an alternative to the mainstream, so it had to be. UPN didn't get that. Thomas Noonan, head of programming, United Paramount Network.
While there was some initial skepticism coming from the top brass in the Viacom Army, the UPN Battalion, and in particular General Valentine, could only be intrigued by the notion of putting on a show with a seldom battle-tested concept, trying to make light of a dark chapter in American history. Of course, the lightness of that shade all depended on what Corporals Finaro and Nathan put to paper, as well as the platoon of performers they would bring on the program to bring those words to life. The troops included veteran acting specialist Kenneth Shy McBride, who up to that point in time had a regular series role on John Larroquette's post-Night Court sitcom and would be tasked to portray the title role of Desmond Pfeiffer. Private Second Class Max Baker, whose only acting credit up to this point was a role in the 1994 video game Club Dead, would be brought on to play Pfeiffer's assistant named Niblet. Staff Sergeant Kelly Connell, whose resume was peppered with guest star roles in the 80s and 90s, would be recruited to play an actual general in this program, Ulysses S. Grant. Major Christine Estabrook, who had experience in stage and screen acting dating back to the 1970s, and was a constant on the TV guest star circuit with roles on shows like L.A. Law, Frasier, The X-Files, and The Practice, among others, was brought on to play First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln. And finally, Veteran New York Police Department captain and longtime member of their Special Victims Unit, Donald Cragen, nom de plume of distinguished actor Dan Florek, would be given the task of representing our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. The battle plan for the series seemed innocent enough, as it would be an Americanized port of what Blackadder's ongoing story would be. Only this time, a black English nobleman named Desmond Pfeiffer, serving as the intelligent and erudite backbone of a Civil War-era White House, populated by licensed idiots. By itself, the concept seemed very similar to that of Blackadder, but to ensure that the program would have an aura of relevance in spite of the dated settings of the 1860s, Finaro and Nathan's concept attempted to be less a commentary on what life was like during the Civil War, and would instead use the storylines from this show as an allegory towards a major current event that was taking place during this time.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
The powers that be felt the show's impact would actually be greater if the actions taking place in the Lincoln White House was more of a reflection of the Bill Clinton White House, not just with the parallel ongoing scandal he was facing at the time of broadcast, but also criticism his administration faced for having a relatively young and inexperienced staff running things behind the scenes, in spite of the insurmountable wave of popularity that both the man and the administration experienced by 1998. Political satire was nothing new in the world of television, and this series planned to be no exception. All the while, General Valentine was so excited about this program's prospects that he wanted the show to become the cornerstone in the UPN Battalion's grand design.
We're going against the current, but we're headed for the mainstream. Because in the obsessive quest for the 18 to 34 demographic, what's being ignored is the largest niche audience in the country. A niche so large, it's not a niche at all, because it constitutes the majority of the people in this country. I'm talking, for lack of a better term, about the American middle class. Dean Valentine.
Meanwhile, as the series ramped up production, and word began to get around over what the show's concept was, various pieces of chatter began to take shape over the battlefield of Southern California. Word had quickly made the rounds that a television program that was prepared to make light of the Civil War had reached so many corners of show business, from trade publications to entertainment reporters to network advertisers and sponsors to heads and executives from other studios, and even those who publicly broadcast the activity taking place within the UPN brigade. Every one of them had hesitations that a network as young and as bold as UPN would not only air a show with sensitive subject matter, but that they would even entertain the notion of greenlighting the program in the first place. Nevertheless, Valentine decided to double down against the skeptics. He declared the program to be the one show out of a nearly dozen shows that he greenlit for the network to be the one to watch for that fall. So convinced were Valentine's convictions over the series that in the summer of 1998, at a meeting of UPN station owners and general managers of network affiliates, Valentine wrapped up the proceedings by showing all of them the pilot episode to what he felt was going to be the UPN Battalion's magnum opus for the fall season. "22 minutes later, Valentine's convictions were left in tatters, as the owners and managers expressed their displeasure over what they saw, and all with the notion that this one show could torpedo 3 years' worth of progress the network had made up to that point.
Well, we're fucked. Anonymous Executive, United Paramount Network.
General Valentine remained steadfast, and in spite of the objections of the owners and managers, he was insistent that Pfeiffer would become the UPN battalion's greatest weapon against the opposition. But as the date of deployment grew closer, word of the pilot spread to various minority organizations whose life missions were to advocate for peace and brotherhood among all races. They were under the impression that because the show was to be set during the Civil War, that the root cause of that war would be seen as nothing more than a punchline, whether it turned out to be the show's intention or not.
Slavery is not funny. The show trivializes our suffering, exploits our pain, and distorts history. Slavery is no joke to us. Danny Bakewell, Chairman, National Black United Fund and the Brotherhood Crusade.
On the morning of September 24th, 1998, some 2 weeks before the program was to be deployed, a flock of protesters representing Bakewell's Brotherhood Crusade, the National Black United Fund, and the NAACP picketed outside the marble-arched gate at Paramount Studios on Melrose Avenue. Their demands were simple and direct: that the series be removed from the network's schedule before a single episode could air. It didn't matter to the protesters that the show was meant to be a satire of modern-day American life as telegraphed via the 19th century. What mattered to them was the imagery and the era in which it was taking place, invoking images far worse in real life than what was being depicted on screen.
The whole concept is offensive. To take that period and deal with it in any way that trivializes Africans being brought to America during that period, it's off limits. If they want to do a documentary or something like Amistad and make people understand the excruciating pain people went through, fine. We're not just going to stand by and allow this to happen. There is no compromise. We want them to pull it off the air. Danny Bakewell.
General Valentine dug in his heels, vowing not to be deterred by the protesters.
It's a misbegotten and false charge that there's any racial sensitivity to the show. The show has nothing to do with slavery. It has about as much to do with slavery as F Troop had to do with the Grant administration. The historical events happen at the same time. Dean Valentine.
All the while, Valentine's deputies at the network did the best that they could to utilize damage control and spin the glaring negatives into what little positives there could be.
We have nothing to feel bad about, and we're not going to feel bad about it. They can march up and down the street all they want. Paul McGuire, Head of Publicity, United Paramount Network.
In spite of rampant insistence from the UPN battalion that the protesters' complaints were, in fact, baseless and knee-jerked, the complaints were so vocal over the days leading to the program's deployment that the UPN battalion seemingly had no choice but to acquiesce and pull the pilot episode from its initial scheduling, and then replace it with a hastily edited version of the program's third episode instead, much to the chagrin of General Valentine.
Anybody who has seen the pilot and whose brain hasn't been fried by the surfeit of political correctness would find nothing racially offensive about it. The LA City Council's motion is a pathetic affront to abridge freedom of speech under the most specious argument. Dean Valentine.
The one consolation that both the UPN battalion and the Viacom Army were both hoping for was the time-tested theory that any publicity was good publicity, and that the firestorm was so rampant that people would tune into the program simply out of morbid curiosity, a hope that was made all the more clear in the network's slapped-together advertisements for the program.
Zillions of people watch the premiere of Desmond Pfeiffer. It's a lot of people. Hear, hear. And this week, gazillions more will gasp, choke, and gag when they see Abe Lincoln in drag.
This lady has no other recourse but to give you a little slap.
Entertainment Weekly calls it must-see to believe TV.
Hi.
They must know me from the penny. The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer, followed by an all-new Malcolm and Eddie, Monday on UPN.
All that remained was what the public would think once the show was deployed, and Valentine's army would march forward into battle.
If the American public tells us they hate the show, it'll come off, just like any other network show. Dean Valentine.
The results of that deployment will be revealed after the break.
In lasting tribute to heroes north and south, the National Historical Society of Gettysburg now dedicates the Civil War chess set. Once again, the armies stand face to face. Ulysses S. Grant, Union King. Robert E. Lee, Confederate King. Sherman, Custer, Stuart, Wheeler. Each figure an original portrait sculpture created for the Historical Society by the artists of the Franklin Mint. Each piece cast in fine pewter, set on a solid brass base, hand enameled in Union blue or Confederate gray. The board is unique, hand-worked, pewter finished with fitted case, no additional charge. Call 1-800-257-1234 and receive 2 Civil War chess pieces every other month. You pay for only 1 piece at a time, only $17.50 a month. Best order by credit card or pay COD with $1 service charge. Each piece has the Franklin Mint's return assurance. The first move is yours. Call 1-800-257-1234.
This week on Telehell's premium content of The Damned.
The copyright of Cool Hand Luke belonged to Warner Brothers. And for some reason, ABC Network became interested in that theme to use it as eyewitness news. So the only thing I did is, when they informed me, fine, no problem. I laugh all the way to the bank.
The only way to listen to Telehell's premium content of The Damned is by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Telehell podcast. For just a few bucks a month, you can listen to our premium content and get some swag along the way. Once again, that's patreon.com/Telehell podcast. And now, back to this week's torture.
My opinion is that you had better not do it. You have not been accustomed to hardship, and it may be more severe than you now imagine. Abraham Lincoln, 1837.
October 5th, 1998. Yankees from the Union Territory of New York were about to sweep their way to another baseball championship. The price of a single share of stock in the Apple Corporation was only worth $34. And at 9 p.m. Union time, 8 p.m. Confederacy time, an opening narration that was tacked onto this episode does what it can to let viewers know what they are about to be witness to.
The Civil War defined America, both the good and the bad. It was the crossroads of our being, and it was a hell of a crossroads. Who would have thought there was a comedy in all that? Well, we did. We were fortunate to acquire an extraordinary historical document. The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer, the P isn't silent, chronicles the life and times of a member of President Lincoln's staff at the height of the Civil War. Pfeiffer, an English nobleman, claimed that he and his trusted manservant were forced by rival noblemen to flee to America due to a dispute over the Queen. All 5 of them.
The 5 queens in question being a reference to a hand of poker that Pfeiffer was accused of rigging, thus resulting in the exile from England. Pfeiffer leads off with an entry in the title diary.
March 5th. This entry will be brief. Just when my spirits were at their lowest ebb, Fortune's loving countenance looked upon me when Niblet, my trusted manservant and part-time footrest, happened upon the discovery of a lifetime. President Thomas Jefferson's long-lost journal, in which he discloses the secret location of his most valuable treasure. Okay, so the century wasn't so brief.
As evident by the fact that this entry will actually encapsulate the entire runtime of the program. Nevertheless, the entry segues into a fruitless attempt to search for treasure that may or may not have been buried by Thomas Jefferson. Hilarity would then ensue.
According to Jefferson's map, the treasure should be 5 paces to the left.
1, 2, what comes?
3, 4, 5!
So it should be right here.
That's the 3rd time you've done that!
Well, it's hot!
To the untrained eye, this seemed like a pointless endeavor. To the few who were actually keen enough to make the connection, this would actually be similar to activities that took place on the British Blackadder, only with Rowan Atkinson and Tony Robinson in McBride and Baker's Place.
I have 2 beans, then I add 2 more beans. What does that make?
A very small casserole.
To you, Baldrick, the Renaissance was just something that happened to other people, wasn't it?
Unfortunately, given the audience trajectory that General Valentine was trying to aim towards, any attempts at a clever comparison would prove to be a dud, as Pfeiffer continues.
You found the treasure!
Oh, we're rich! It's beautiful, sir. I've never seen such an exquisitely flawless brick.
No, my evolutionary cul-de-sac. The treasure is in this box. And that means I can pay off my gambling debts to those thugs who've been threatening me.
Ah, have you been playing the horses again, sir?
No, I got hooked on Indian bingo. Yeah. See, they let you get ahead, and then they pass around that peace pipe, and brother, you're gone.
Within the program's first 3 minutes, the humor can be argued to be shallow at best, but nothing of note took place that would deem the program to be offensive. At least, not yet.
It is an old maxim, and a very sound one, that he that dances should always pay the fiddler. Abraham Lincoln, 1837.
The first formal act of the program starts as Pfeiffer and Niblet inspect the treasure they just discovered, hoping it would be of any value.
Precision-made locks like this require finessing, a gentle touch, and most of all, patience. Man, give me that brick!
Alas, the treasure would have to wait, as first, the President and Mrs. Lincoln enter the kitchen with what the actual plot of the episode will entail.
Don't you walk away from me, mister! Last night I left my love flame burning and you didn't come to blow it out. What's your lame excuse this time?
The Civil War, Mary?
The Civil War! What about my needs? When do I get the attention of the executive branch?
I can't believe the war is the easy part of my day.
Just as President Lincoln couldn't believe that the war was the easiest part of the day, historians are equally dubious that Dan Florek was able to resume his career in the Law & Order franchise after this aired. Nevertheless, the whimsy between Pfeiffer and Niblet continues.
What's that?
Nothing.
Oh, it's a priceless ring we found.
Why don't you shut up?
Really? You found this in the White House?
It's merely a trinket, madam, a bauble. Don't give it another thought.
Nonsense. Let me see it. Oh, I like it. I'm going to keep it.
We've got to get that back.
It won't go wrong. I must be retaining water.
The duo seems to have found themselves in the middle of a classic storytelling trope. The retrieval of an article of jewelry that won't seem to slip off the finger of its unintended wearer. A battle tactic that is as old as the days of ancient Greece.
You're making me crazy because you won't give me my ring back.
Thus, last evening, you tried to take it by force, thinking I was unaware.
You knew?
And as Pfeiffer and Niblet scheme to retrieve the ring from Mrs. Lincoln, we soon meet what passes as an imitation of General Ulysses Grant, as he hires a comely lass of little professional experience to be the president's latest secretary.
General Grant. Ah, Desmond. Have you met the president's new secretary?
Miss Fabersham.
Charmed. Welcome to the White House.
Well, I don't officially have the job, but Yuli said with my qualifications, there'd be no problem.
Oh, where were you last employed?
I was a round card girl at a bare knuckles fight.
All of which leads to the reveal of the main story for this episode, as Pfeiffer and Niblet listen in on a scintillating conversation the president seems to be engaged in.
What's that tapping sound, sir?
It's the telegraph inside the president's office. My loins ache with desire for you.
Well, I'm flattered, my lord. But I'm your servant, not your boy toy.
Shut up, Niblet. I wasn't talking to you.
Somebody's mad because he didn't get what he wanted.
As previously mentioned, the series' intention was to be a reflection of modern-day times while using the pastiche of the 1860s to tell its narrative. The effort attempted to be evident, as indicated in the title of the episode, AOL, Abe Online, a thinly veiled homage to what Bill Clinton had engaged in during his present administration. Though, whereas Clinton's promiscuity was under full scrutiny from the public, Lincoln's infidelity would prove to be nothing more than ham-fisted folly.
Mr. President?
I wasn't doing anything.
Should we just leave your breakfast?
Yes, that will be fine.
My body trembles at the thought of your touch.
Hey, you keep this up and I'll have a case for harassment.
Enjoy.
What do you mean by that?
Your sausage.
What do you mean by that?
Your breakfast.
My breakfast?
Not to be outdone, the series also depicted the Confederacy in a seemingly respectful way.
Has the White House responded yet?
No, sir. We've managed to tap directly into the White House telegraph line, but it always seems to be busy.
All right, well, you keep sending it there. It's urgent that we establish communications.
They must be sending out a flurry of battle plans, General. Another attack may be underway.
If only I knew what that brilliant Lincoln was thinking.
A way that is almost immediately negated by the disrespectful portrayal of President Lincoln.
Daddy gonna get some sugar. This little piggy went to market, and this little piggy was a bad boy.
To say nothing of the truly reprehensible way Mary Todd Lincoln was being represented in the series. Although it was public knowledge on the record that Mrs. Lincoln did experience bouts of insanity, little was mentioned about her hygiene and grooming habits.
Fever!
It was this scene in particular where Niblet tries to retrieve a priceless ring from the foot of Mrs. Lincoln that drew particular ire from some critics.
Does it treat slavery as a joke? Glancingly in the scuttled pilot. The approach is not malicious, but its careless attitude seems only marginally better than outright bigotry. That original episode, which UPN says it is reviewing and may reschedule, explains the current flap better than tonight's. The slaves haven't been emancipated yet. Get your feet off the table, an officious White House staffer tells Desmond. The joke is that Desmond is superior to this buffoon in every way. Desmond, who has never been a slave, is by far the smartest man in the White House. The true idiots are white, including Desmond's personal lackey, Niblet, whom he describes as my trusted manservant and part-time footrest. Niblet literally cannot tell his right from his left and repeatedly puts his hand on a hot stove. Desmond Pfeiffer cannot be defended as a satire attacking slavery. That would require a level of sophistication this muddled series never approaches. Instead, both episodes rely on jokes so cheap, they seem positively vaudevillian, and a mean-spirited running gag involves the sexually frustrated, plump Mary Lincoln, frequently seen in her bubble bath, raising her arms to reveal major underarm hair growth. Karen James, TV critic, The New York Times.
Afterwards, more buffoonery took place.
He better have a damn good reason why he doesn't want to see me.
So the president is having telegraph sex.
Okay. Tell him to be careful. You never know who you're talking to on those things. You think it's a hot babe, then you travel cross country to Ohio to meet her in some train station hotel. Turns out to be some fat, sweaty kook named Hiram. So I've heard.
And while the notion of catfishing being developed in the 1800s reared its ugly head, the Confederate Army continues to have their advances spurned due to poor communication.
Our message of surrender must have finally gone through. I've received a response from the White House.
Well, that's good, son. What does it say?
It says, "You're gonna get the licking of your life."
Licking? How dare they? We'll see who licks who. I will lick them from top to bottom. Dispatch the following message back. Be prepared to be brought to your knees.
Knees? Now you're tapping, lady.
And while the notion of the Civil War continuing for as long as it did due to a series of nomenclatural errors, for some reason, this program continues to bring people to the verge of subtle political satire.
This is the Oval Office. You're the leader of this country. And if I may be so bold, sir, you're acting no better than a horny hillbilly from Arkansas.
A satire that may be considered too subtle for the audience that General Valentine sought out to capture.
We've screened the show for many audiences, including African American audiences, and no one has found anything remotely racially offensive about the show, for the principal reason that there's nothing racially offensive about the show. When audiences, Caucasian, African American, Latino, see it, they will understand it for the political satire that it is. Dean Valentine.
As the long first act of the deployment ended, the events of the second act began to unfold, still with Pfeiffer and Niblett trying to retrieve the ring from Mrs. Lincoln, with results that would strongly argue to be hilarious.
Oh, a ring! Oh, what a shame it draws attention away from your beautiful feet. Perhaps I should remove it.
Ow! That hurts.
Oh! Stop it! I said stop it!
While there were to be claims that the previous scene was scribed by Private First Class Jebediah Tarantino, those claims were later dismissed to be both unsubstantiated, fictional, and a throwaway anachronism on our end. We apologize. As Pfeiffer continues to clean up the mess left in Mr. Lincoln's wake.
I want to apologize about my behavior. What you told me made me realize that I should stop this tawdry telegraph tomfoolery. I only hope that I can one day regain your respect.
You're meeting her tonight, aren't you?
At the Beef and Brew on Avenue K. How did you know?
Little do the president and Mr. Pfeiffer realize that they are about to be peppered with further anachronisms to the modern-day audience.
I said we should each be wearing a pink carnation. Here, put this on.
Why me?
Do you know what would happen if the president were caught in a compromising situation? What would I do? Apologize to the entire nation? I'd look like a complete ass.
With all the subtlety of a knee to the crotch, the story continued to stagger to what would turn out to be a series of weak-willed punchlines.
I don't belong here.
I'm glad you came to your senses, sir. Let's get back to the White House.
You're right. I've wasted enough time with this woman. I mean, who cares if she's gorgeous, if she's sexy, if she's the most provocative, passionate being God ever put on this little blue marble we call Earth.
You're not leaving, are you, sir?
What's 5 minutes? Besides, at this time of night, it's hitch-to-hitch traffic out there.
Only 2 minutes remained in the UPN battalion's opening salvo, with little to show for their efforts aside from the words scribed for the sake of shock and awe. So much shock that by the time Mrs. Lincoln enters the scene wearing a pink carnation, the overall punchline of the episode is laid threadbare.
Mrs. Lincoln?
Oh, my God, Desmond! I secretly suspected it was you.
Oh, Mrs. Lincoln, no.
Oh, there's no need to play coy. I'm your fantasy girl. Remember, you called me that after I told you ... dash, dash.
Hey, I'm eating here.
The payoff of the show is that it turns out both Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln were both cheating on each other with each other. A plot that stood the test of times on many television series before and since. But somehow, the intended target was miles off its trajectory.
That was you? With that sultry, seductive, naughty.
What about you with that steamy, hot, this little pinky? I knew it was you all along.
Me too, Mary.
Take me home, or take me here on sawdust.
Take her home!
As the scene plays out, the program reaches its conclusion by settling the remaining detail of the antique ring that was found at the start of the episode.
So, on account of Niblet's clumsiness, the ring was lost to me forever. I can only hope that some other worthy individual in the White House will someday find that ring and put it to good use.
Bill, I just found a way to help pay for your legal defense fund.
Please, don't come in right now, sweetheart.
All that I have written here is true. This is the secret diary of Desmond Pfeiffer.
I once had the confidence of the people, and if I have since done anything, either by design or misadventure, which if known would subject me to a forfeiture of that confidence, he that knows of that thing and conceals it is a traitor to his country's interest. Abraham Lincoln, 1836.
With their munitions spent and their cavalry wounded upon the program's completion, the UPN battalion soon retreated back to their encampment at the marble arches of Melrose Avenue, exhausted and weary from the battle, but satisfied in knowing that despite the controversy that surrounded the conflict, that the battalion's vision would soon be viewed by the masses who witnessed it. But even by the standards that the small but mighty battalion had established for itself long ago, the campaign proved nothing short of disastrous. With an estimated 2 million people watching the televised assault, resulting in a ranking of 116 out of 125 television programs that aired that week. A number that would see even sharper decline once the counter-barrage of criticism derived from the pens of those who were paid to watch the travesty had their say. Critics who were far less kind.
Years ago, I vowed not to waste any more brain cells critiquing Hollywood versions of the Black experience. But the sitcom, or better yet, Slave-com, The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer on UPN, has had me foaming at the mouth. On a network like UPN, whose young viewership is likely to possess a skeletal knowledge of history, this type of amusement seemed more than a trace irresponsible. Lisa Jones, reporter, The Village Voice.
Barry Finaro and Mort Nathan probably had all the right intentions in mind. It's likely that they and the UPN brass were hoping that their viewers would be placated when they saw that Chi McBride's character was both the only African American and only intelligent character on the show. It's possible that in Finaro and Nathan's minds, a Married with Children set during the Civil War would be so odd that it would be intelligent and work on the pure strength of satire alone. Then they decided that a live-action Merry Melodies would provoke images of a smirking Abraham Lincoln, plugging his ears with his fingers before discovering his Acme product malfunction, and it would hang in a museum? I don't know. What I do know is that the two had not worked together since, possibly due to a deserved indefinite suspension from the mayor of television. Roger Cormier, Venture Magazine.
The United Paramount Network, which caters to the lowest common denominator on the intelligence range of a normal basis, has gone and done it again. Tell UPN that the step infection days are over. Stop watching UPN. Let them know that they can't respect us, they don't need our viewership or our dollars. There certainly wouldn't be a sitcom about the Irish potato famine or the Holocaust, so there's no reason for us to be yucking it up about slavery. Dr. Cecil C. Ray, Chairman, African American Studies, Gettysburg College.
A large part of the Pfeiffer defense has been to point out that Butler Desmond, who also served as Lincoln's kitchen cabinet advisor, is the show's smartest character. Therefore, the sitcom can't possibly be racist. Please, folks. This is the oldest trick in the book of black caricatures in Hollywood. From Bill Bojangles Robinson to Rochester to Benson. The servant who's smarter than the master, but how cute, still happens to be a servant. Pfeiffer's intelligence was an aberration, meant for our amusement, not to disturb the social order that placed him as lackey and Lincoln as head of state. That Hollywood can continue to present African Americans as the help, while blacks account for nearly 1/4 of American moviegoers, and dare call it innovative programming, is more unspoken conspiracy than charming coincidence. Lisa Jones.
The sitcom is based during the Civil War, and though no show comes to mind that attempts to make a comedy of that era, with good reason. Desmond Pfeiffer practically avoids the major issues of the time. This show is not where we should pour our greatest energies of protest. We expect that this program will be canceled due to a lack of merit, entertainment-wise anyway. The editors of Electronic Urban report.
When the ratings for the premiere came in, it was just like a flat line. Every show had the same rating, which was horrible. All that heat and no rating spike. I shut my office door, put my head down on the desk, and realized it was the wrong week to quit smoking. Paul McGuire.
With the controversy and criticism dealing devastating blows, the Battle of the Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer was declared a catastrophic failure on the night of October 26, 1998, leaving the UPN battalion wounded and leaving historians with one final question to ask themselves. When all was told, where does this ill-fated battle find itself among history's greatest disasters? And furthermore, amongst the underworldly parables of limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery. Of the 9 episodes of the show that were made, 4 of them were broadcast, leaving 5 of them, including the pilot, in a state of limbo. Though while the UPN battalion did acquiesce and put on alternate programming in place of the pilot, it did nothing to change the fact that the program had flaws beyond the flaws it was already being picked apart for. The depiction of an era in American history that was known for its violent bloodshed was being played as a farce. The farce being further augmented by the sheer volume of sexually themed, lustful humor in an effort to pose as pointed commentary on the current presidential administration. Commentaries that, in one way, shape, form, or another, also tried to do what its British counterpart from the 1980s did, with much more well-received results on the battlefield. The fact that they tried to duplicate the battle plan for an American audience was lazy at best, shameless at worst. And for that effort, this warped interpretation of Blackadder with a black butler only dooms Pfeiffer to be labeled as a fraud for the rest of his days. One who was witness to all the controversy the program attached to had to wonder, however, what exactly was it about this program that had the sharpest of critics brandishing their weapons towards the UPN battalion? The program that aired was meant to replace the pilot episode, which some had deemed to be far more scathing in material. So much so that it harnessed the wrath of various political and minority groups before the program ever saw the light of broadcast air. The ensuing controversy was welcomed into the UPN battalion in the hopes that the seemingly unwarranted attention the program suddenly received would result in a reaping of tremendous ratings and profit for the Viacom Army, thus heightening the impulse for greed among the soldiers. Nevertheless, General Valentine persisted with efforts to make whatever positive strides were necessary in order to have the viewing faithful be able to see the show for what it was. Ultimately, the mission's failure will be best summed up by author David Hofstede's book, What Were You Thinking?, where he ranks the show at number 54 among what he felt were the dumbest moments in TV history, stating, quote, "The What Were They Thinking here belongs not with the series. A dumb, short-lived sex comedy that would have failed on its own merits without outside help. But those who huffed and puffed over imagined affronts, and a Los Angeles City Council that should have better things to do." End quote. A sentiment that ordains the battle plan as a case of treachery for all involved, the protesters for their complaints, and UPN for embarking on the enterprise in the first place. If the protesters left well enough alone, the show would have probably still failed anyway, given the undisputable fact that it had the odds stacked against itself by being projected onto a battlefield that few were paying attention to regardless, which leads to one final caveat regarding the program's existence: the mere fact that it was trying to make light of a dark event in American history, and that if the events were to be interpreted as such, it would make a mockery, a travesty, and would be considered heresy towards the events of the war itself and those who fought and died for this country as a result. The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer fires 8 out of 9 cannons on the battlefield of television. What was originally seen as a battalion's hope for supremacy along its battlefield quickly became a folly so transparent that the Viacom Army soon began to lose faith in the efforts of General Valentine.
All of a sudden, the existing UPN audience saw the change in direction, and they said, "It's not for me anymore." And the new folks hadn't come in yet. And that terrified the owners of the network so much that they pulled back on the finances to a radical degree. And from my point of view, that ended the United Paramount Network. Not because it wasn't pursuing my vision anymore, but because the financial support for the network dried up. Dean Valentine.
While the experience ultimately left Valentine and his army wounded beyond repair, the battalion would persist in trying to appeal to the expanses of America, while at the same time revisiting the pages from the battalion's early history. They already had a steady plan in place to appeal to a young male audience. All they needed was the correct and proper artillery.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the XFL!
But that's a chapter for another day and another era. The war between both the Viacom Army and the Warner Brothers Army would rage on into the early years of the 21st century. In spite of the bloodshed that was spilled between the two rival factions, a treaty was eventually signed between the two of them in 2006, when both encampments joined forces to become the CW Battalion, a fighting force whose fate remains uncertain to this day. As for General Valentine, humbled by the efforts he made that were equal parts fortuitous and in vain, was discharged from the UPN battalion at the turn of the century, and would later devote his life to the archiving of historic documentations left behind by his fellow soldiers, or as some would call it, the archive of the Television Academy. In his own words, Valentine himself reflects on the toils, tribulations, and rewards of the creative process.
The last thing the world needs is more television executives. One is one too many, from my point of view, and I can't think of, and particularly in this environment, it's really not necessary. You know, what the world never has enough of is people who are passionate about ideas and passionate about supporting people with ideas. And that's really what I think you ought to do. And if you do that, and if you stay on that part of it, because people who are interested in media are probably in it because of that, because they're interested in creative things and being involved with creative people, and you know, that if it's that, then I think it'll all work out okay. I don't even know what that means anymore. Nobody knows what an executive does anymore. And certainly these companies, nobody knows what they are, and whoever does understand it doesn't like it. I don't think it's I would say don't bother, you know? Think of something really productive and engaging to do with your life. You know, there's a lot of need for great narrative. You know, there's never enough good stories in the world. You know, there's never enough people to support and finance people who want to tell good stories and to fight the fights for them. And I think those things are worth doing.
In this troublesome world, we are never quite satisfied. Abraham Lincoln, 1848.
Simulation complete.
So, what'd you think?
Well, it didn't suck. It was definitely on the pretentious side, but at least it was different. Maybe if I loosen a lug nut here and there, I won't be so uptight the next time.
Please enter your technician's diary entry.
Diary entry?
That's part of the beta testing process. Every time a simulation is complete, I gotta report what I observed before launching into another test. Excuse me. Technician's log. First entry. We've just completed the first simulation of the genre mat. For the most part, nothing of major malfunction circumstance seems to have taken place. The test subject guinea pig remains unconscious, unaware of the actions that just took place, and will remain unconscious as long as a steady but safe amount of knockout gas inhabits the holding cell. For all intents and purposes, the guinea pig will think everything that's being simulated is part of a dream. As for the simulation itself, it appears to be a decent, if not meandering, recreation of a documentary-style TV program. We'll continue to program the machine with more genres of storytelling as the experiment continues. While the lack of media-related crutches in the review, i.e. clips from The Simpsons, is encouraging for product development, calibration remains required to come up with a more natural segue between act breaks and a severe reduction in pretentious dialogue. But regardless of nitpicks, the first test remains marginally successful. Entry submitted is 21st day of July 2024 by BLZ Bub, Esquire, Chief Executive Officer, The Underworld.
Diary entry submitted.
Done and done. Now let's get to that moonshine. Hey, did you find any 300 proof? I kinda need to go blind after seeing Mary Todd Lincoln's armpit hair.
I've got him in all kinds of intensities. Blindness, tingling skin, bone disintegration.
Well, whatever you got, let's make a toast. Here's to the genre mat and all the torture we're gonna do to that fuckbones in there.
Here's to the genre mat.
The following voices appeared in this program in alphabetical order. The Devil's Secretary was played by Joan Bishop. Thomas Noonan was played by Sean Carney. Karen James was played by Kiersten Davis. The anonymous UPN executive was played by Andrew Dick. Paul McGuire was played by James Hernandez. Lisa Jones was played by Christine Long. Abraham Lincoln was played by Michael Luce. The Boss was played by Darren Marlar. Dean Valentine was played by Rob Maurer. Dr. Cecil Gray and the editor of Electronic Urban Report was played by Yarnel Mois. Danny Bakewell was played by Darin Patterson. And Roger Cormier was played by Nathan Ragland. With a special appreciation, if he's listening, to Kevin Perjurer of Defunctland on YouTube, whose episode about the scrapped plans for a Disney Civil War theme park was the primary inspiration for us doing this episode, as was Ken Burns and his Civil War documentary. This concludes Season 6 of Telehell. We will return in a few weeks for a postseason wrap-up, as well as what our plans for the summer are, and what this episode that you just heard means in the grand scheme of things down the line. In the meantime, thank you, as always, for putting up with us for this season, for these past 6 seasons, for the past 5 years, and especially for the years ahead. Thank you.
Telehell was written, produced, edited, and narrated by me, Justin Hart. All clips used in this program are protected under the Fair Use Doctrine of the U.S. Copyright Act of 1976, and all clips used come courtesy of their respective companies and owners. Some of the music used in this program comes courtesy of YouTube and their audio library service. Telehell is a production of Horton Road and is distributed by Libsyn.
You know that thing that people do in order to communicate with each other without actually having to look each other face to face? You know, social media? Well, we do that. Look for us on X, Facebook, and now Blue Sky. All 3 of them at Telehell Podcast. And don't forget to like, comment, rate, subscribe, and pretty much tell us what you think of our show everywhere that you can stream us. And also on our complaint line, telehellpodcast@gmail.com. This season of Telehell is dedicated to the memories of Eric Askeles and Candace Glade Santos. I miss you both.
Another great show from Horton Road.